If you asked me what the biggest problem in my life was 2 months ago, I'd say it was my lawnmower, which kept giving me problems. And look how innocent I was. Because today, looking back, I realized that the real problem wasn't the broken machine, it was the woman who showed up with a fake flyer, saying that my lawn posed a threat to the community. I'm laughing now, but at the time, I was in real shock. It started on a normal Wednesday morning, clear skies, hot coffee, dogs barking in the wind as usual. Everything seemed peaceful, until I saw a silhouette standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, and a clipboard resting on her chest like a badge. It was her, the new resident of the house at the end of the street, the one who had already kicked up a fuss at the condominium meeting because a neighbor had painted her door mustard yellow. She stared at me as if I had just murdered an entire botanical garden. A look of disgust mixed with superiority, as if she were a divine envoy from the Federation of Perfect Lawns. The woman crossed her garden with calculated strides, crossed the street as if she were treading on sacred ground, and reached my fence. With a tone of voice worthy of a frustrated civil servant, she said, "Your lawn is not up to the safety standard laid down in the community guidelines. This can cause structural problems, attract pests, and pose a risk of cross-infestation." Hello? For a second, I really thought it was some kind of internet prank. But it wasn't. The woman was standing there, serious, holding a piece of paper with the condo's logo on it, badly printed and crooked, by the way, and giving me a verbal warning that I had 48 hours to mow the lawn, or I'd be fined up to $500. $500 for tall grass. I didn't even know my grass was a criminal length, I swear. It was just grass. Overgrown, yes, but nothing that looked like a swamp or attracted alligators. And yet, there she was, explaining the rules. Except, there was one detail she didn't expect. I'm the kind of person who reads internet cable contracts. Yes. And that piece of paper she was brandishing like it was a search warrant wasn't in any of the condominium's official archives. But she insisted. She said it was a new guideline, approved by an internal vote, a vote that, amazingly, no one in the condominium knew had taken place, not even the chairman of the board. And so, the joke began. She started going around the neighborhood with a measuring tape. Yes, a measuring tape, and kept measuring her neighbors' lawns, writing down deviations and irregularities on a clipboard. It became a sort of CSI of suburban gardens, with the right to photographic records, videos, and even spray marks at specific points on the sidewalk. As if they were mapping crime scenes. I thought it was an isolated outbreak, but it wasn't. The woman started appearing every day, every morning, with the same beige clothes, that hiking cap, and the inseparable clipboard, and what was just a nuisance became an obsession. She left a note on my door saying that my yard was about to become a sanitary problem. She used those words without fear of sounding ridiculous. I began to notice that she stood outside, watching through the fence. Early in the morning, in the afternoon, even in the early evening. Once I came home and found her crouched down, looking at my plants with a blue flashlight, as if looking for traces of a botanical apocalypse. She said that my lawn was attracting disease-carrying insects, and that I was an epidemiological risk to the neighborhood. I began to wonder if she had a grass fetish, or if she simply had nothing more interesting to do. Spoiler, it was the second option. And as if that wasn't enough, she started calling the neighbors to informal meetings in her backyard, where she would hand out copies of that same fake paper and start making dramatic speeches about the decaying landscape of our street. One day, she cried. She really cried. She said it was unacceptable to live in a place where wild nature took over homes. She was talking about my lawn, the same one that my broken mower wouldn't let me mow. The neighbors? Most of them laughed, but some, the more influential ones, started to buy the idea. And the next thing I knew, there was a small group of lawn disciples gathered around, muttering about maintaining neighborhood standards, and talking about taking action. I just wanted to cut the grass and live in peace. But of course, with this woman, that wouldn't be possible. She didn't just want her lawn mowed. She wanted a war, and war is what she got. The problem started to get out of hand when she tried to get the council officially involved, but as the woman was just a resident with no position, nor an active member of any committee, no one took any notice. And when I say nobody, I mean nobody. The president ignored it, the liquidator laughed it off, and there was even a neighbor who replied to her letter with a photo of the lawn saying, "Green kisses." But she didn't give up. That's when she decided to become a kind of parallel authority in the neighborhood, as if she had been elected in a secret cult where only she had the right to vote. I thought she'd get tired of it over time, but instead she started showing up wearing a reflective vest and a plastic badge that she'd clearly printed herself at home. The badge read, Landscape Wellness Coordinator. I laughed, of course. I thought it was a joke, but it wasn't. The woman was taking it seriously, with a level of commitment that, frankly, scared me. She started walking around with a transparent plastic folder with stapled sheets, tables of grass height by season, WHO recommendations on mosquito proliferation, graphs of bush growth based on soil moisture. I was stunned. She was a one-person cult, and then came the fine. Yes, the woman had the audacity to hand me a notice, as if she were a local authority. It was a brown envelope with my name scribbled on it in blue pen, and inside was a landscaping infringement notice, written in Comic Sans and signed by herself. She put an expiration date and a suggested amount for community compensation, in this case, $300, and a basket of gardening products to be delivered to her garage. I don't know how I didn't laugh in her face, honestly. But that wasn't the most revolting thing. It was seeing her sticking copies of the notice in other yards, too. She went crazy, people, literally. She knocked on all the houses in the street and left the same papers, as if she were handing out fake bills. And some neighbors were really confused. One of them, an elderly man, called me to ask if he was behind with any new fees, because Mrs. Karen from the landscaping committee had left a notice on his balcony. That's when I realized this wasn't just a tantrum. It was an organizational outbreak. The woman started registering my lawn. I swear on everything. She took pictures every day. She started making a digital folder with evidence of environmental neglect. She took photos from the same angle, with the date in the corner, as if she were investigating an environmental crime. One night, I heard a noise in the yard. When I went out to see, she was holding a tape measure, kneeling on the grass, measuring every centimeter with a flashlight in her mouth. It was midnight. Midnight. I don't know what she expected to find there. A hidden marijuana plantation? A mutant fern? And what's worse is that when I asked her what the hell she was doing in my yard, the woman still had the audacity to reply with, "I'm protecting you from an infestation. Be grateful." Of course. Thank you for invading my property at 2 in the morning to measure the weeds. What would I be without your chlorophyll patrol? I even thought about calling the police. But honestly, I was curious to see where this was going. I was sure that at some point she would end up being hospitalized or something, but then she decided to appeal. She started making false reports. She'd call the condominium's number saying that my yard smelled bad, that she suspected dengue outbreaks, buried garbage, biologically unsustainable activity. She used those words, okay? Biologically unsustainable. I thought it was a joke, but no. Real inspectors started showing up because of the anonymous calls. And of course, they found absolutely nothing. It got to the point where the condominium staff themselves were laughing, like it was her again, right? The woman was spending the time of her life trying to turn a slightly overgrown lawn into a public health scandal. And it wasn't as if I'd left the land to God. It was just grass, a bit tall. It was even green, alive, beautiful. But for her, that was the harbinger of the apocalypse. And then, like any creature that loses its mind, she came up with an even more absurd idea. She tried to call an emergency meeting with the residents, proposing the creation of new internal landscaping regulations. She wanted an amendment to the condominium bylaws to be voted on, stipulating a maximum grass height of 4.5 centimeters. That's right, 4.5. I don't know if she measured with a ruler or a square, but anyway. And her justification was preservation of visual order and maintenance of community biological harmony. When I heard that, all I could think was that she needed a hug or a straitjacket. At the meeting, she brought cardboard. Yes, cardboard, with diagrams. There was a card with clippings of well-trimmed grass, another with images of tall weeds, and one that said, "The escalation of neglect begins with carelessness. People." She made a timeline of the moral degradation of the neighborhood based on the height of the grass. I've seen a lot of nonsense in my life, but that was beyond me. And you know what's funny? Nobody took it seriously. There were neighbors who came just to laugh. One brought popcorn. The assembly ended with her shouting to herself and calling everyone complicit in the decay of the landscape as she collected the papers. And of course, she left saying that history will prove me right. That's when I realized this woman didn't want to cut down my bush. She wanted to cut down my spirit, to dominate, to stamp authority on a place where no one had given her power. And I swear, I tried to stay calm. But what she was going to do next was going to make the whole thing look like a joke. It was when she decided to involve City Hall that I realized my life had turned into a special episode of comic tragedy. The woman, apparently frustrated at not being able to intimidate me with invented fines or imaginary votes, decided it was time to appeal to the higher authorities. And of course, since she proclaimed herself the guardian of the neighborhood's green morals, she thought it would be a good idea to file a formal complaint claiming environmental and visual risk to the community. Yes, that's right. She basically said that my lawn was putting the emotional integrity of the neighbors at risk. Her words. One day I came home and found a real notice from the town hall itself, stuck to my door with masking tape. It was a request for an inspection, filed on the basis of multiple complaints about inadequate maintenance of residential vegetation. For a second I thought it was a hoax, but no, it was official. An inspector was coming to visit me to assess the situation. And guess where the multiple complaints had come from? Yes, from her. Only from her. The woman had sent more than 15 complaints using different names and fake emails. There was even one signed, "Anonymous Citizen Concerned About Collective Well-Being." The lack of dignity was such that I was even a little impressed by the level of commitment. You could set up a department just with the work she put into inventing these identities. The inspector arrived on a Friday morning, looking like he'd rather be at home watching a soap opera rerun. He was polite, looked at the yard, measured the grass with a little thing that looked more like a school ruler, laughed and said, "This is just a normal lawn, sir." He took some protocol photos, filled in a report, and then said, "Between you and me, this is nowhere near what I've seen around here, but some people are bothered by tree shade, aren't they?" I laughed, because it was either laugh or cry, but, of course, the fact that the inspector had ruled out any problem only made her paranoid. The woman started accusing the town hall of corruption. She said they were covering up green crimes. She used that term, green crimes. I thought she was making fun of me, but then she started spreading it to the neighbors. She said that I had bought the inspector, that I had inside connections, and that I was part of a landscaping mafia. I, who can barely convince my dog to stop digging holes in the garden, became head of the mafia. I didn't know if she was going crazy or if she really believed her own fiction. She printed flyers. I swear to God. Pamphlets. She put them in everyone's mailbox. It had a black and white picture of my lawn, with the word "danger" in red above it. Below it was a list of possible consequences of plant neglect. It listed everything from snake proliferation to property devaluation and increased collective anxiety, as if my overgrown bush was going to trigger a mass panic attack. The leaflets were signed by a fictitious entity called the Green Citizen Vigilance Commission, which, of course, was just her. There was even a neighbor who responded by sticking a post-it note on her gate with "Go Wash a Dish Committee," and the woman still felt proud, as if she were leading an epic crusade. I think she saw herself as the Joan of Arc of suburban landscaping. Things became unbearable when she started filming. That's right, the woman appeared with her cell phone in hand, recording stories as if she were a grassroots influencer. Here we are, another day, in front of the neighborhood threat. This is the situation at number 48. Look at this. A tragedy. An abandonment. He spoke as if he were narrating an accusation of federal corruption. It had subtitles, a filter, and a suspenseful soundtrack. It was hilarious and worrying at the same time. But then she went one step further. She invaded. I'm not exaggerating. She came into my yard when I wasn't home. I skipped the security camera video thinking I was going to see the dog knocking over the garbage, and there she was, with a little notebook, measuring, taking notes, recording videos. She even pulled up a tuft of grass and put it in a little bag with a zipper, like CSI. I don't know if she was going to send it to the lab, do a DNA analysis, an exorcism ritual. I don't know. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it. She said that, as a citizen, I have the right to investigate irregularities, and that if I tried to stop her, I would be violating her right to defend the community. I wanted to ask her if she had studied law at the WhatsApp college, because honestly, so I decided to file a police report. I couldn't treat it as a joke anymore. She was crossing real boundaries. I filed the report, took the videos, handed over everything. The policeman who attended to me, a guy with a gray mustache who looked like he'd seen a lot of nonsense, just shook his head and said, "It's always one of these girls who makes things up. Last week there was one who called to say that her neighbor's cat was spying on her through the window." But as much as the authorities were finally beginning to realize that the woman had lost her mind, she wouldn't stop. On the contrary, it seemed that the more I resisted, the more motivated she became. She started trying to recruit neighbors with promises of creating a model neighborhood of landscaping excellence. There was even a petition with 5 signatures. 2 were hers under different names. She distributed brooches with a grass design and the slogan, "Short is beautiful, clean is safe." She even painted the hood of her car lime green and wrote, "Movement against unruly grass." I thought, that can't be true, but it was. I started to avoid leaving the house just so I wouldn't bump into her. I hid behind the curtain like a garden escapee. When I went out, I'd go straight to the car, avoid eye contact, pretend I was on the phone. But it was no use. The woman would always find a way to show up. Sometimes she'd come out of nowhere from behind the fence, like a villain in a horror movie. I was beginning to believe that she had hidden cameras, because the timing was always absurd. And then came the climax. She filed a petition to have my house reassessed as a vegetative risk zone. She wanted it to be designated as an area of special interest for the condominium, subject to external intervention in the event of continued neglect. In short, she wanted permission to mow my lawn by force, with her bare hands, with an axe, if they let her. I realized that this was no longer about grass. It was about control. She needed to master something. She needed to be heard. It was an obsession, a desire for relevance disguised as community zeal. And I, by pure chance, became the target of the outbreak. But what she didn't know was that I also had a plan. And I was going to make it very clear that if she thought she was in charge here, she was very wrong. The final straw came one Sunday morning. I woke up to the sound of an engine in my yard. It wasn't the normal sound of cars or neighbors washing their sidewalks. It was another kind of noise, a mechanical, insistent roar, vibrating right through the bone. When I opened the bedroom window, what I saw made me wonder if I was still asleep. Her, with an electric lawnmower, in my yard, not on the sidewalk, not on the edge of the plot, in the center of my garden, with her hands firmly on the machine's handlebars, advancing as if she were leading a medieval crusade. She even had a sash tied around her forehead, as if to absorb the sweat of all the justice she thought she was doing. A woman of almost 50, mowing someone else's lawn as if it were a purification ritual. I went downstairs without even wearing slippers. I opened the door shouting that she was trespassing, that it was a crime, that she had lost her mind for good. She didn't even stop. She shouted back over the noise of the machine, "If you don't look after it, someone else has to," as if she were the hero the neighborhood hadn't asked for, but which she had appointed herself. The neighborhood started coming out of their houses, a couple with coffee in hand, another with a cell phone already recording. It was a spectacle. There were people laughing, others incredulous. A neighbor who never messed with anything even muttered, "My God, she really did it." I was in a state of shock. I stopped the woman by pushing her away from the mower. She screamed that I was assaulting her, started shouting for help, threw herself on the ground on purpose, as if it were a Mexican soap opera. She said she had been pushed violently, that I posed an imminent physical risk. All this because I touched her arm and told her to get out of my house. Minutes later, the police arrived. Someone had called, probably herself, because the response time was almost instantaneous. When the officers arrived, she was already on her feet, but pretending to have a limp. She put her hand on her lower back, saying that she had been attacked during an act of community service. She said that, act of community service, as if she were a civil servant charged with protecting the neighborhood from unruly lawns. I, taking a deep breath so as not to lose my head, explained everything. I showed her the camera footage, the video of her entering, cutting in, screaming, the scene of her pretending to fall. The neighbors all confirmed it, and for once, justice did its job quickly. She was taken away, not handcuffed, but escorted to the car. I was still trying to convince the police that this was an interpretive misunderstanding about property. The policeman just rolled his eyes and asked her to stop talking. It was clear that even the law's patience had been exhausted by the whole show. Over the next few days, the mood in the neighborhood changed. The flyers disappeared. The measurements stopped. She became quiet, a kind of strategic silence. But I knew she still hadn't accepted defeat. She was just preparing for the next attempt. And that's when I decided to play her game, only my way. I put together a dossier. I took everything I had, prints of the flyers, photos of the evidence she was spreading, videos of the break-ins, prints of the fake emails I discovered she was using, copies of the police report, recordings of her accusing me of leading a grass mafia. I made a complete compilation, a veritable Karen Files. I sent it to the management of the condominium, to the association's legal department, and to the town hall, and I also gladly sent a printed copy to her own house, along with a handwritten note. "Since you like paperwork, here's a bit for your collection. With love, the dangerous lawn." The response was almost immediate. The condominium association called an extraordinary meeting and, based on the evidence, made it official that this woman could no longer represent, speak, or act on behalf of the neighborhood under any circumstances. She received a formal warning, and best of all, she was forced to publicly recant for misusing the association's name and falsifying internal documents. The look on her face as she read the retraction, in a low voice, spitting out every word as if she were swallowing glass, was better than any Netflix series. From that day on, she became a shadow. She still lived in the neighborhood, but she never crossed my path again. The lawnmower was never seen again. The mowers disappeared. The lime green car lost its lettering. She even retired her tape measure. She became just another resident, one of those who looks down when someone passes by. A decorative piece, quiet and useless. She stopped being a problem and became an inside joke. My lawn? It's still there. Grown up, slightly out of proportion, just the way I like it. Green, wild, natural. A symbol of resistance. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't about the height of the grass. It was about not lowering your head to the crazy woman who wants to become a sidewalk dictator. And that, my friend, that I will never allow. End of soap opera. But if she tries to get up again, I know how to nip it in the bud. And if you liked it, don't forget to leave your comment and your like below.